Hello, my name is P-A-I-G-E, and I'm going to teach you all about the history of sign language. First of all, imagine yourself being surrounded by all of your friends and family singing you happy birthday. However, the only way you know what they are saying is by your mother or father translating the sound into a different type of communication, sign language. The question of who invented sign language is often pondered, and its answer ultimately results into many components. From the earliest of mankind, to those who lived on Martha's Vineyard, to the French, and to the Americans, sign language has flourished and become an essential part of communication. Now let's look at the earliest of mankind. Not only did they not have any clothing, shoes, and showers, they also had no formal way of communication. Before the standardized system of speech was established, they had to use gestures in order to communicate with each other. According to the book Researchers into the History of Mankind and Development of Civilization, it states that the earliest man had to use picture and word writing in order to communicate with each other. In similar motivation, the deaf community were forced to create sign language, which was vital to their everyday communication. Imagine yourself in a utopia where not only the deaf, but also the hearing use sign language as their most formal way of communication. Well, believe it or not, there was actually such of a place. It's called Martha's Vineyard, and it dates back to the 17th century. And according to the book published, Everyone Here Spoke Sign Language, it states that the settlers carried a gene for the deafness. Tufts University did a study and found that 1 in 4 children were actually born deaf. In an article in the Dukes County Intelligencer, it reads that deafness was so common that the hearing thought it was a contagious disease, and in order to live in the land, you had to learn sign language. Although the deaf were one of the first to make their own system of sign language, Europe was the first to create a system of learning this new way of communication. It dates back to 1771 in Paris by a man named Charles Michel de la Paix. He was the first person to create a sign language which was very widely used. Children came from all over the land, including those from Martha's Vineyard, to learn his new way of language. He combined their home signs with his standardized way of sign language and created the new French Sign Language. In spite of the first school being established in Europe, French professors contacted Americans and ultimately brought sign language to America. Once it traveled to America in 1817, the first free public school was established. It was created by 2 men by the names of Larned Clark and Thomas Hopkins. Larned Clark was originally from Europe and was a professor for French Sign Language. Thomas Hopkins ultimately brought him back to America where they could open up the school. They combined the French Sign Language along with the Americans' home sign language to create the American Sign Language. With that said, not just one person or organization can claim credit for the creation of sign language. So if you wanted to know who invented sign language, it really depends on what exactly you're asking. The first person to use sign language was the earliest man. The first person to create a more complex version of sign language was the earliest deaf people. Charles Michel de la Paix was the first to create the French Sign Language, and Larned Clark and Thomas Hopkins were the first to create the American Sign Language. There are different versions of sign language that are used all around the world. They have all come about because of the essential need of language, communication, and the education of deaf people.